Hey there, and welcome to this episode on the future of money. Now, we live in this digital world these days where thing is getting more and more electronic. We seem to live on our phones these days. You know, you walk past a bus stop and everyone's there with their holding their phone in their hand, staring down, no one looking up and talking to each other anymore, which is a bit sad. But the reality is, live in this very digital world. And so I want to talk to you about the future of money then and how this digital world collides money. Now, of course, over the last sort of 10 plus years, we've seen the emergence of what we call cryptocurrency, digital money, if you want to call it that. And in fact, these days, there's something like more than, I think, not more, certainly more than 10,000, probably close to 20,000 digital coins. The most obvious one being Bitcoin. And of course, there's other ones as well out there. And you could reel off a whole heap of names, but Bitcoin being the most well-known one. And these are built on a technology called blockchain. Now, look, I'm not an IT guy, so I don't want to seek to try and explain any of the technology side of it here, but merely to say, these are new ways of people being able to buy and sell things amongst each other. You know, you can send Bitcoin to someone and to pay for things. It's not really commercial so much yet. I mean, it is in some cases. Some organizations will let you pay for things in Bitcoin. Most still want normal currency. You can see certainly there's been this massive rise. And of course, cryptocurrencies attracted a lot of attention because I'm sure you probably know someone who's done really well. I've certainly got one or two friends that have made a lot of money out of it. They got in early, so they made a lot of money. Equally, I know lots of people, probably more people, who have actually lost a lot of money because with these cryptocurrencies, I certainly have a lot of reservations in terms of how do you value them? You know, what are the projects that sit behind it? What's the real value? What are you really buying? Because ultimately, these things trade in markets, and ultimately, their real value is what people are willing to pay for them when they buy and sell and transact. So it's a fascinating area and fascinating technology. But what I want to talk to you really about today, though, is more the bigger picture developments that are going on and how governments are getting in on this action and where this is all heading. And so where this is all heading is into what we call central bank digital currencies. Now, when most people think of their money in the bank, they kind of think of it as digital already. You know, you go into online banking and you transfer money to somebody, etc. We kind of think of it as digital already. But with cryptocurrency and in the case of central bank digital currencies, it's different. Really, the money that you're moving online, in theory, is you're moving, you know, traditional currency from A to B. But with cryptocurrency, this is and central bank digital currency, which has been built on this blockchain technology, it is basically going to be a government-run cryptocurrency effectively, and it'll be, if you like, organized and distributed by the central banks. So, for example, I believe over 100 central banks around the world are developing their own central bank digital currency. So that's in action. Some countries have already launched it, like in Nigeria, where they I think the currency is called the Naira. I'm not sure if I've pronounced that correctly, but they've launched the e-Naira, and that's been fairly chaotic from as I understand it. But nonetheless, there's a big appetite for essentially governments creating their own digital dollar. So if you think about the US dollar, you'll have a crypto version, a central bank US dollar. You'll have the same with the Australian dollar. In the UK, the British pound, I think they're going to call it Britcoin. So you can see these central banks are all getting in on this. Now, is this something good or bad? I want to talk to you about, I guess, some of the risks of it and a bit about the sort of, I don't want to say too much about the technology because I'm not an IT guy and I don't propose to have that knowledge. But essentially, it is going to be like, you know, Bitcoin in the way you have it now, except it'll be administered through the major banks. So the banking system can still continue. Because you think about it, you could, in theory, with a central bank digital currency, have an account directly with the central bank and bypass all the banks. But that's not how they're going to administer it. They're going to administer it through the banking system. So you'll still use your normal bank, but you'll have a digital Aussie dollar, a digital US dollar, or Canadian dollar, etc. And you still use it through a normal bank. However, what's interesting about it is it will be programmable money. Okay, so at the moment we have what we call fiat currency, which is paper money. And of course, you see the online digital version of it. But with cryptocurrency or central bank digital currency, it will be programmable. So, for example, a central bank could program it so that it expires after a certain period. In other words, if I'm, say, the government and we go into a recession, I might say, well, I want to give everyone $900 to spend, as the Australian government did back during a period when things were tough and the economy was slumping. They gave everyone $900. And so in doing so, what that means is they could say, right, if it's not spent by a certain period, i.e., say within 6 months, it expires, becomes worthless. Now, it's in one sense that's pretty handy because it's a great way to force money into the economy. You don't want people to save. If you're the government, you don't want people to save it necessarily. You're trying to stimulate the economy, and if it's going to expire, then people are going to spend it. Whereas if you gave them the old style of just giving them $900, they would just put it in the bank and not use it necessarily. Now, of course, many people do go out and spend it, but some don't. And so it's a really interesting sort of technology. The other thing is then you could make it geographically so it works only in certain areas. So, for example, you might have your particular currency and you can't go to a certain area because the currency won't work in that area. So it could act as a tool of control whereby they could prevent you from moving because your digital currency, your digital dollar doesn't work in that particular location. Okay, so that's a potential major concern, I think. And so my concern, I always try and look through these things and say, well, what's the real benefit here? The governments are going to sell this because this is a major project going on around the world by central banks, usually in partnership with major banks in those countries. But then it can also be a way of tracking carbon use. So, for example, they may say that you've used because banks and some banks are already doing this, they're tracking your carbon spending, okay? How much carbon you're using when you spend your money. In fact, there's a particular bank I'm thinking of in Australia whereby I'd have a carbon account whereby it will tell you what your carbon consumption is every time you spend money. The governments might say, well, we're worried about climate change and therefore we're going to not let you spend a certain amount on meat. You can only have a certain quota each month and then you won't be able to spend any more, or we won't let you go too far, or we won't let you buy that kind of car anymore. Or there's all sorts of controls that may potentially occur through these currencies because, as I say, they're programmable, and that will make it a big challenge. Now, some other countries are going down a different path. So, for example, interestingly, in El Salvador, they've actually allowed Bitcoin, which is totally decentralized, to become legal tender. So you can literally use Bitcoin in stores, unlike in most other parts of the world, which is really interesting. I'd be interested to see how that works out for them over the years. But what's beautiful about that is promoting economic freedom, which I think is potentially the opposite to what may occur with central bank digital currencies. Because with Bitcoin, no one has control over it, whereas with central bank digital currencies, there'll be a lot of control and potentially how it gets used and what you can use your money for. And so you have to ask yourself here, what's the risks? Well, the risk here is that the government decides what you can and cannot spend your money on. Okay, now that to me is a big concern when we look at the book of Revelation, where we see that it says in the end times, you won't be able to trade, without the mark of the beast. And of course, when you think about this kind of technology, this technology makes that sort of thing possible. Previously you could put your money under the bed. You could put whether it's your paper currency, your gold coins, whatever it is. But with this, if they ultimately outlaw, normal fiat paper currency, and you just only have digital currency left, then of course you've got this situation where they'll have control over what you can and can't buy. This is already being used certainly in China with the social credit system there, whereby if you are deemed to be not really complying with the way the government wants you to, you won't be able to use certain transport, you won't be able to fly on a plane, you won't be able to leave the country, etc. So there's all this sort of potential restrictions. And of course, there's also the issue of privacy. Will people be able to see every transaction you do? And in one sense, it will give enormous transparency to government and of course to banking. Now, keep in mind, banks in theory can look through your statements and see where it is now. So it's not like you've got that much privacy already, but this is going to the next level. This is where essentially potentially government bureaucrats and anyone could access your spending data. And of course, there may be sort of government deals between private institutions and governments about who can access their data and so forth. And a lot of control may end up in hands of the big institutions. So to me, there's some questions around that. Of course, the other issue is, what about if we had a crisis in our society, maybe due to war, where essentially the electricity goes off for an extended period of time, or you get a cyber attack? I think they are very real concerns. Keep in mind that, once again, even if some of those things were occurred today, pre-central bank digital currencies, if you had a war on your soil, the good chance that electricity is going to be down anyway. Digital currency, you're not going to be able to move money, internet banking, but of course you may have paper currency at home and things like that. So it would still be fairly chaotic anyway. But there's the risk of total destruction of data, through some of these types of events. I don't want to speculate on those things, but of course, in the Bible, we do know things will get darker, and we do know there are, wars and rumors of wars, etc. And we're seeing that, of course, going on around the world. So I think we do need to step back and always be wise. I'd like to think that if you're a government official, yes, you want to create a functional society that works, but where everyone can flourish. If you take some of these things too far to control, it may have a lot of very negative side effects. To me, a huge important thing to me is freedom. I think freedom is very important to us as humans, to be able to transact between people that we want and so forth. And I think these things are potentially quite restrictive and may give too much power to the wrong people. So we have to really think through these things and really pray about them as to whether we should be introducing these things into our society anyway. But I think when we look at the way the world is heading and the direction governments are heading, we are certainly moving down this path of increased government control and increased centralization of data. That's seems to be where this is all heading. And I think in one sense, largely unstoppable. So the important thing here, what then should we be doing if these things do get introduced, which to me seems largely inevitable? Now, whether they do it, I think they'll be largely sold as a convenience tool. Maybe they're brought in during a time of crisis where they say, well, look, we have to do this because we need to make sure people aren't avoiding their taxes. We need to reduce terrorism. There's all these things we need to have to do it. Governments, like during the COVID period, they took a very strong, often heavy-handed approach to things. And we may see exact same sort of thing with these. And that is, I think, very concerning. But so my view is we should be prepared for these things. And I always say to people, you need to prepare in lots of ways. I almost say you kind of live life on two tracks. One is we need to prepare for potential storms ahead. The Bible says a sensible man watches for problems ahead and prepares to meet them. The simpleton never looks and suffers the consequences. So on the one hand, we need to be prepared. That's a wisdom issue. How far you want to take that is entirely up to you. To me, you don't want to be this obsessive person where you run away from the world hoping that it all just goes away. That's not what I believe God's calling us to. He wants us to go into the world and to make disciples. So we've got to be in the world, but we do need to be prepared. We need to be sensible. But equally, on the other track, we need to be moving forward and thinking, irrespective of the craziness going on around me, what am I called to do? Where am I going to move forward to? How's God wanting me to build his kingdom? Okay, so we don't just become this sheltered prepper, of which, as I'm saying, you do need to prepare. You need to be wise about things that may happen in the future. I make it no secret that I have a veggie garden. I'm a guy who sat in an office for most of his life, got no idea about things like veggie gardens, but I'm learning because, one day, what if the lights go off? Or if food supply becomes an issue, or all these issues, I wouldn't know how to deal with them. And so I'm learning. But then I'm still getting on with what I'm called to do, which is to help people, teach people about money and fulfilling the calling that I have. So very important to live wisely and have that balance, not to go too far one way or the other. So anyway, the future of money, it's going to be fascinating. Certainly the Bible talks to it. Very much so in terms of what's going to happen in the future. Certainly what's fascinating now, of course, is the technology exists for some of those biblical prophecies to be fulfilled. So watch this space because it's going to get interesting as time goes on. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. God bless you.